Okay, so getting back into our coverage over the X-Men, we do pick up with X Factor issue number 101 and 102. Now, honestly, I kind of wish I went ahead and covered these two issues alongside in our last video. And the reason why, because these two issues do pick up where the last video left off at. And honestly, we need a quick rundown of what happened in the previous video. You see, at the very end of X Factor issue number 100, you had a member of the team actually die, and that would be Jamie Maddox. You see, we had learned in the earlier parts of our coverage that for Jamie, he had gotten the legacy virus. Now, the legacy virus was a big thing in Marvel Comics in the 1990s. It was killing off mutants left and right. And unfortunately, two people on two different X teams had gotten the legacy virus by this point in our coverage. One being Jamie and the other one being Kawanin over in X-Men Comics. But either way, for Jamie, he had gotten the legacy virus. Now, you had X Factor run into a character known as Haven. You see, for Haven, by this point in Marvel's timeline, she was a new character, so we're still kind of learning everything about her character. But for Haven, she had predicted that in the far, far future, there's going to be this big event taking place all over the world where you're going to have 3/4 of the human race dying off. And that should lead the way for a new kind of humans to rise up and lead the earth in a better direction. But here comes the big problem. You see, for Haven, she hated the idea of waiting 700 years. And so her goal was to go ahead and bring that big event now in the present day. And so you had X Factor trying their best to stop her. Now, when it came to Haven, she also had the ability to heal people. And honestly, she did heal people. She even healed up Wolfbane. The question was, could she heal up Jamie Maddox, who had the legacy virus? Now, she gave Havoc a choice, like, you decide if I should help him or not. And for Havoc, it was more of like, yes, you should help him because I want to see my friend survive. And so she tried to use her powers to help him, but unfortunately, it didn't work. And so by the end of issue number 100, Jamie died. And so now it's X Factor trying their best to move on from his death. Like, for example, we pick up with Havoc, and you have Havoc right now feeling very upset about the idea of the death of Jamie. He blames himself for the death of Jamie because it was Havoc who told Haven to use her powers to hopefully save the life of Jamie. Now, here's the big thing with the legacy virus. There is no cure by this point in Marvel's timeline. So most likely, when it comes to Jamie, he would have died by the hands of the legacy virus. But for Havoc, it's more of like there was a small chance that Haven could have saved the life of Jamie, and I told her to do it. But instead, what she had did to him had killed him off. It's Havoc saying it's all my fault that I have now lost somebody under my command. And the way that he is acting right now is also affecting Polaris as well, which honestly makes sense because for Polaris, she's also grieving, but she wants to be with Havoc to have somebody in her corner to kind of work through the whole idea of grieving. But the problem is Havoc is not there. And so she's kind of wondering where in the world he has gone to. Now, for you new X-Men fans out there, in the early 1990s, when it came to X-Men comics, you had a lot of different power couples. Cyclops, Jean Grey, Rogue, and Gambit. And for me personally, Polaris and Havoc. They were that other power couple that honestly could have got married in X-Men comics. But either way, this begins the process of the idea of those two characters no longer being together. But right now, it's Polaris wondering, like, where did her man go to? But now we have to shift our focus over to Wolfbane and also Strong Guy. And for me, this is why I love this issue so much, because it gives us a chance to see how the death of Jamie is affecting each character on the team. And so for Wolfbane, it really does bother her a lot. And honestly, it makes a lot of sense because for Wolfbane, she now lost two people that were close to her because back in Fall of the Mutants and the New Mutant storyline, she lost Cypher, who was a close friend of hers. And so now she had lost Jamie, another close friend of hers. Now, for Strong Guy, he's trying his best to just move on. He tried his best to grieve by using jokes. And that's Strong Guy's character. That's all he knows how to do to get through different pains that he is feeling, physically or mentally. And so right now, it's him being jokes, and it really does bother Wolfbane a lot. But she realized that Strong Guy is sad, but the only thing he knows how to handle grief is to make jokes. And so she realized that he needs her just as much that she needs him right now in her corner. But now we can jump back over to Havoc. Now, when we do, we see Havoc going through a situation where basically the diner he is at is getting robbed. Now, you do have the guy go ahead and take the waitress and try to use her as a hostage, but to also use her to get whatever he wanted from the diner. Now, you do have Havoc go ahead and be that hero, but that's the problem. For Havoc, he's done playing hero. Because to him, he's tired of the idea of having all that responsibility under his belt. Because let's not forget, it was Charles Xavier. It was Alex Summers who had asked Alex Summers to be the new leader of X Factor, to work for the government. It was them who had asked him to do it. He didn't want to do it at all. He was done with the idea of being an X-Men. He was done with the idea of being a hero. And unfortunately, he said yes for Charles Xavier. And look where that got him. He lost somebody while he was in charge of the entire team. And so for Havoc, we're getting the idea of him possibly leaving X Factor altogether. But now we have to jump over to Random, Polaris, and also Forge. But I really want to focus more on Random here. And here's the reason why. Because for Random, he is a mutant that has the ability to adapt to other mutant abilities. But also for Random, he is a mercenary. Now, in an earlier storyline, we had talked about the idea that he was hired to go after Polaris. Now, of course, he had failed at the job. And so we come to find out the people who hire Random was somebody in the government. Now, they let him go, but the problem is they're now coming after him as well. And the reason why? Because he knows too much. And so for Forge, he said, hey, listen, me and X Factor will pay you a lot of money if you are able to tell me who hired you, but also to help us bring them down. And so now it's Random, Forge, and also Polaris going to work together to go after that person who works in the government, who is coming after Polaris. Now, this book is not all about the different members of X Factor who are dealing with the death of Jamie Madrox. It's also about Mohamed Taggart, because his death is also hurting her as well. Because to Mohamed Taggart, she looked at Jamie like a son. And so the whole idea of losing him is kind of like losing a son in her life. She's literally falling apart here, and she realized that the last time she had spoke to him was a long time ago, because she got so busy trying her best to figure out to find a cure for the legacy virus, the same kind of virus that had just killed off the man that she looked as a son to her. And so you have Charles Xavier just trying his best to be there in her corner, but like, this is rough for her. She already lost her biological child, and now she lost somebody else that was like a child to her, like a son to her. And so she's falling apart. And so to close on the first chapter for today's storyline, we jump over to Havoc. And when we do, it's really more of Havoc telling us that he still believes in Charles Xavier's dream. He still believes in the idea that X Factor could do great things for the world. But he also believes that X Factor would be better off without him. Because again, he blames himself for the idea of Jamie's death. And so this is Havoc just going ahead and leaving X Factor behind. And matter of fact, he drops his ID card. And so there goes Havoc with the possibility of somebody could possibly replace him. And so, as we dive into X Factor issue number 102, we now pick up with a character known as Colonel Malone. Now, Colonel Malone was the guy who hired Random to go after Polaris. As we all know, Polaris got away and Random got fired. But right now, the guy's being told by his boss to no longer go after Polaris and no longer to go after Random. Now, for him, he hates the idea that he's being told that. He feels like this is the perfect time to go after Polaris and also Random. But again, his boss says you will not go after them at all. And the phone call ends on that note. But now we jump over to Random, and when we do, we see Random kind of having a nightmare. Now, this nightmare is really more of the idea of Random kind of telling us that there was somebody in his life that looked at him as a monster. They looked at him as nothing normal at all. And so for Random in the nightmare, he's trying to prove that he's not a monster, that he is a human. And he's also trying to pull himself together to look somewhat normal. By the end of the nightmare, he's then able to wake up, but we can tell that this is not the first time he had this kind of nightmare. But we jump over to Storm, Wolfbane, Strong Guy, Charles Xavier, and also Mohamed Tagger. And you have Storm kind of allowing rain to happen in the area they're all in. And the reason why, because to Charles, he believes that everybody needs a cleanse to their souls as a way to kind of wash away all the pain that they were feeling thanks to Jamie's death, to kind of allow them to move on. Now, after you have Storm kind of making rain in that area, you then have Wolfbane being able to kind of be herself for once. Because for a very long time in Marvel Comics, when it came to her being part of X Factor, she was unable to be herself. You see, all the way back in the Extension Agenda storyline for Wolfbane, unfortunately, she was kidnapped by the government of Genosha, and they had turned her into a slave. But they also kind of programmed her mind to be madly in love with Havoc. Now, luckily, thanks to Haven, she was able to heal the mind of Wolfbane, where now she was able to be a normal young girl once again. And so you have everybody kind of loving the idea of Wolfbane finally being herself again, but also we can see Wolfbane being able to rebuild that bond with her adoptive mother, Mohamed Tagger. It's honestly a great moment. But now we can jump over to Polaris. Now, when we do, it's really more of Polaris wanting to have a better understanding of Random. And what I mean by that is, for Polaris, she kind of realized that Random is always pretending to be somebody else that he is not. It's also her kind of realizing that he's trying to hide his true emotions, and she wants to be able to bring that out of him. And so you have Polaris look up different pieces of information about Random. And here's the thing. For Polaris and also Forge, they kind of believe with Random being a mercenary, that truly meant that the dude had killed off a lot of people. But you have Polaris find out that's not really true at all. The dude only killed off like 3 people, and that's really it. And so for Polaris, she also comes to find out that for Random, his main goal is to make sure that when he's out there trying to complete a job, he wants the low amount of violence happening when it comes to him trying to complete those jobs. And so she begins to realize that for Random, he is a completely different kind of person. Now, you do have her, Forge, and Random leave to go find the person who was coming after them. And of course, that would be Colonel Malone. Now, for like a few panels, we do kind of find out that Havoc had officially left X Factor. And matter of fact, he's on his way over to Hawaii to just get away. And that's a quick check-in for that character. But getting back over to Random, Polaris, and also Forge, you have Random take Forge and Polaris over to a company called Beltway Travel. Now, this is a front. It's not really a travel company. It's actually a government office. And so you have the 3 characters go inside and they find Colonel Malone. Now, for Colonel Malone, he did not come alone. He brought 2 other characters, the Commando and also Avalanche. Now, here's the thing. These two characters, they were part of a team called Freedom Force. You see, in the late 1980s, you had Mystique's version of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants begin to work for the government. But of course, they had a different name. Freedom Force. And their goal was to work for the government, but to also be forgiven for all the crimes that they had committed. Now, over the years, you had different members of the team just leave the team, and it's now only down to two people. Commando and also Avalanche, who are still working for the government. And right now, their goal is to protect Colonel Malone. Now, when it comes to Forge, he's kind of like, listen, we already know who's now behind the whole idea of coming after Polaris. There's no need to battle against Colonel Malone and his two guys. But then at the very last second, you have Forge say, you know what? No, you came after my team. You try to kill somebody on my team. I don't like that at all. And so you have Forge turn around and just give one heck of a hook in the face to Colonel Malone. And you have Random and Polaris begin a fight against Commando and Avalanche. And so after a few pages, you do have Polaris and also Random being able to take out both Avalanche and Commando. Now for Forge, he goes after Colonel Malone. Now here's the thing. For Forge, his main goal is to make sure that Colonel Malone paid for the crimes that he had committed, to face the government that he had portrayed. But here comes the problem. You see, you have Colonel Malone say, nah, there's no way I'm going to go ahead and pay for the crimes that I had committed. And so he commits suicide by shooting himself right in the head. But right after all of that, we're then confronted by his boss, and that would be Patrice Connors. Now, for Patrice Connors, she's in charge of the department, and apparently their main goal was to build up different ways to protect the Earth from Magneto, and Polaris was one of those ideas, better known as the Polaris Project, to see how powerful she truly was, to use her just in case everything else failed. When it came to protecting the Earth from Magneto, they were going to use Polaris. But here comes the big catch. Colonel Malone, he hated mutants so much that his main goal was to drug Polaris, brainwash her, and turn her into his own personal slave to work for him. But of course, things did not work out for him. And so you have Connors tell Polaris that she's very sorry for what had happened to her. And then she just leaves just like that. But you didn't have the book kind of end on two different notes. The first note is that you do have Polaris say goodbye to Random because, hey, he did his job. He told our heroes who was trying to come after Polaris. So he got paid. But we're also establishing the whole idea of these two characters now having a bond with one another. But also the possibility of Random being able to open up to Polaris. And then he leaves. But we also kind of find out that Connors is being controlled by a character known as Malice. And we might see her in the next video or two down the road. But this is where we're going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see you on the next comic book video.